We've all heard that we never get a second chance to make a good first impression. That first impression is particularly important when we interview for a job. As university students, we all look forward to graduation and to the time when we will get an opportunity to pursue our dream jobs. For the majority of us, getting that first job in our chosen field will involve an interview. Imagine that you've sent a letter of application for a position you're seeking and that you've been invited for an interview. You've researched the company, you've analyzed your strengths and weaknesses, and know why the company should hire you. You've dressed for success, and you've arrived early for the interview. Just as you're relaxing and getting your thoughts together, you're warmly greeted by your interviewer with a firm handshake and invited into another office. The interview has begun, and you've made your first impression. Now, what has your interviewer learned about you during those first few minutes? Your social skills? Your level of enthusiasm? Your dialect and a broad sense of your geographical background? Your sense of confidence? Your ability to listen? Your basic educational level regarding language usage? Yes, all of this and more. All of us speak with a dialect, but some dialects are better than others when we find ourselves in an interview with a prestigious firm. Now, we should embrace the dialect of our origins, but many of us will be well served if we can add the professional dialect to our speaking skills. The professional dialect will help assure that our listeners will listen to what we have to say rather than to the way we say it. In this series of nonsense sentences, I will be using a common professional dialect pronunciation of some key words. In some instances, another pronunciation will work fine. But in this exercise, I want you to imitate what you hear. Now first, I'll read the entire nonsense sentence exercise. Then I will examine key pronunciations in each sentence. Finally, I'll reread the exercise, asking you to repeat what you hear. 3 mischievous Italian guests performed an obligatory Mozart sonata. They couldn't escape Mrs. Oil unless they wanted a similar schism in the Illinois government. With their accessories, the candidates presented posthumous crystal awards, comparable to those described in a library pamphlet. Any specific gesture often created a genuine response from the rural juvenile. The members of the cavalry stopped long enough to eat an oyster, a salmon, and an almond from the chest of drawers, to drink some water which was probably left from the lamentable deluge, and to get a medicinal chassis worth 5 cents. The athlete finds strength in the idea that zoology isn't comparable to superfluous experiments. The perspiration was indicative of physical exertion. The length of time the realtor showed the facade discouraged the buyer, who evidently stated irrevocably that he wouldn't entertain Baptists or Methodists in a house with no chimney. Our university often formulates theories stimulating men to think of studying history, literature, statistics, adjectives, sentences, diphthongs, giblets, detergents, and theaters. Can you walk and touch your forehead while you use your larynx? Just ask for a picture of the furniture that you find preferable. Dismiss any irrelevant interpretations at the time they're mentioned. When could the men receive a comparable honor? Now let's re-examine these nonsense sentences and focus on some key pronunciations in each sentence. In the first sentence, let's look at the word mischievous. Notice the ending of the word, the spelling is V-O-U-S. Repeat after me. mischievous. The next word we'll focus on is Italian. Notice the beginning has the sound of I, as in igloo, it. Italian. The next key word is guests. More than one guest. We're inviting 3 guests to dinner. Now, if you have difficulty at the end of this word, practice it this way. Practice the final sound saying this. Not but then practice saying guests, and then finally narrow it to guests. We'll go on to another key word, and that is obligatory. Obligatory. The next key word is the composer Mozart. Let's try it together. Mozart. Now let's go on to the second sentence. The word is escape. Escape. Another key word is Mrs. Mrs. The next key word is oil. Note that oil includes the diphthong oi. Now, a diphthong is one unit of speech created by sliding from one vowel to another. Oi. Oil. The next key word is wanted. Let's be sure to include the T sound in wanted. The next key word is similar. Similar. The next key word is schism. Schism. Then we hear Illinois. Illinois. And then the last key word in that sentence is government. Now let's look at the next sentence with the word accessories. Notice the k in accessories. The k, accessories. Next we'll say candidates. Be sure to get that first d sound, as in candidates. Candidates. Let's also be sure to include the t sound in presented. Presented. The next key word is posthumous. Posthumous. The next key word is comparable. Comparable. If you have difficulty with any of these combinations of sound, try breaking the sounds into various units. For example, in comparable, we might just say comparable. Comparable. The next key word is library. Library. Notice the diphthong I in library. And then the final key word in this sentence is pamphlet. Notice the PH creates the sound of f. Pamphlet. The next key word in the next sentence is specific. Specific. Next we'll look at gesture. Gesture. In the next word, we will omit the sound of t and pronounce the word as often. Often. But we want to keep the t sound in the next word, created. Created. Then we'll look at the word genuine. Genuine. Next, we'll look at the word rural. That's a difficult word for many students in our area. Listen again. Rural, rural, rural. And then finally in that sentence, we'll focus on juvenile, juvenile. In the next sentence, the first key word is cavalry, not to be confused with another word, Calvary. The two words are completely different in spelling. So this word is cavalry. Then we'll go on down to look at the word oyster, another diphthong, oi, oi, stir, as in oi, stir the pot, oi, oyster. When we look at the word, the fish word, we will omit the L sound, the L, and just say salmon, salmon, Sammy, salmon. We'll also eliminate the L sound in almond, almond. We include this object in this exercise, chest of drawers, just to point out that there's no such object as a Chester drawers. It's a chest of drawers. We'll go on down now to the word probably. Probably. In our informal speech, we may pronounce that another way, but in our professional dialect, we want to say probably. Next, we'll look at the word lamentable. 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 Next, we'll look at deluge. Notice the end of this word sounds like j. Fudge, huge, budge, deluge, deluge. Next, let's look at the word medicinal. Medicinal. Next, listen to the sounds in chassis. Chassis. And in the last word of this sentence, be sure to add the s sound as in sense. Next, let's look at the word athlete. Be sure not to add a syllable or a vowel sound that's not there. So we'll just say athlete. Be careful after ath and not let a vowel sound creep in there. Athlete. The next word we'll focus on is strength. Strength. Let's isolate those sounds. Strang, strength, strength. Let's listen again. Strang, strength. And of course, I suspect most of us say idea. Let's look next at the word zoology. 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 And of course, we've already covered comparably. Just remember to pronounce it as comparable. The next word is superfluous. Now, this is a tough combination of sounds. Superfluous. If I were to ask you, who flew us over the ocean? Superfluous. Superfluous. Superfluous over the ocean. So super, the stress is on the second syllable. Fluous, superfluous. Let's look next at perspiration. Perspiration. Next, let's focus on indicative. Indicative. Let's move on to the next sentence. We focused on strength previously, but now we see the word length. Let's try again. Length. Length. The next word we'll focus on is realtor. Again, be careful not to let an extra vowel creep in after real. Just realtor. The next word we'll focus on is facade. A false front. Or if we're pretending to be something we're not, we might be putting on a facade. So, facade. The next key word is evidently. And let's be sure to stress that first syllable. Evidently. Just feel your body move into that first stressed sound. Evidently. Percussively, it would sound like this, and maybe this won't be too percussive. Evidently. Evidently. Not evident. Okay, so evidently. Just push your big toe down or pat the toe inside your shoe to say evidently. If you have trouble with it, just say evident and then add the ly. Evidently. Evidently. Now let's look at the word irrevocably. Irrevocably. If you have a tendency to get a little tongue-twisted saying this word, just break it down into smaller parts. Irrevocably. Irrevocably. Next, let's be sure to include the first t sound in entertain. Entertain. And just as we added the s sound in guests, we want to be sure to add that sound in Baptists and in Methodists. Let's move on to the next sentence now. The first word, say our. Our. The same pronunciation as if we were pronouncing H-O-U-R, our. We encounter often again without the t sound. Let's move on to some other words in this sentence. For example, studying, studying. Notice there's no hard g at the end of the word, just studying, studying. History, history. Next we'll say literature, literature. The next key word is statistics. Listen again. Statistics. Statistics. And then we'll focus on adjectives. Adjectives. The next focus word is sentences. Sentences. The next word is diphthongs. Diphthongs. That PH is pronounced as if it were f. Diphthongs. Then we'll pronounce giblets, and we all know what giblets are. Those innards of the turkey or the chicken, the liver, the heart, the gizzard. Your grandmother or your mother or your father might have prepared giblet gravy to put on your Thanksgiving or Christmas dressing. And the final word in this sentence that we'll focus on is theaters. Theaters. In the next sentence, as we look at the word walk, remember there's no ul in walk. Walk that walk, talk that talk. The next focus word is forehead. There are 3 professional dialect pronunciations of this word, but we're going to pronounce it as forehead. One more time. Forehead. Forehead. The final focus word in this sentence is larynx. The voice box is the larynx. This word is so often mispronounced that in some of our speech communication texts it's even misspelled. But the professional dialect pronunciation and the only pronunciation is larynx. In the next sentence, let's look at the second word, ask. Be sure that you don't reverse the k and s. It's ask, ask. Let's look at that small word there. If we were saying the letters of the alphabet, we would say A, B, C, D, E, F, G. But except for a couple of exceptions, we will always pronounce this word as never accented. It's not but just a pickup note, a picture, a box, a table. Notice that just a little pickup. It doesn't stand alone very well. The next word there is picture, not to be confused with something that contains liquid, just the picture on the wall. Then we'll look at the word furniture, furniture. And the last focus word in this sentence is preferable, preferable. In the next sentence, let's look at the word irrelevant, irrelevant, irrelevant. And I think that most of us will say interpretations, interpretations. Let's go on down and look again at comparable. We've encountered that a couple of times, but comparable. Now you'll note that in this entire exercise I haven't focused much on the DT substitution, the kind of DT substitution that we'll find in words like batter up, this is my friend Betty, would you pass the butter, may I have a glass of water. Even our most highly paid national professional communicators use the DT substitution in conversation in reporting the news. If you were studying to be an actor and wanting to learn the standard stage diction, you would not substitute D's for T's. But if you're speaking to the American public, you certainly would want to sound conversational even while using the professional dialect. So that's not a focus that we're going to have in this particular exercise. Now that we've broken down the exercise, I'll read the exercise sentence by sentence, giving you a chance at the end of each sentence to pronounce the entire sentence. Then we'll move on until we finish the exercise. So let's begin. Ready? 3 mischievous Italian guests performed an obligatory Mozart sonata. They couldn't escape Mrs. Oil unless they wanted a similar schism in the Illinois government. With their accessories, the candidates presented posthumous crystal awards comparable to those described in a library pamphlet. Any specific gesture often created a genuine response from the rural juvenile. The members of the cavalry stopped long enough to eat an oyster, a salmon, and an almond from the chest of drawers, to drink some water which was probably left from the lamentable deluge, and to get a medicinal chassis worth 5 cents. The athlete finds strength in the idea that zoology isn't comparable to superfluous experiments. The perspiration was indicative of physical exertion. The length of time the realtor showed the facade discouraged the buyer, who evidently stated irrevocably that he wouldn't entertain Baptists or Methodists in a house with no chimney. Our university often formulates theories stimulating men to think of studying history, literature, statistics, adjectives, sentences, diphthongs, giblets, detergents, and theaters.